Welcome back to another Jurassic Park card game preview video. Today we are going to look at some more species cards. We're going to look at a selection of canonical species that we've either skipped over or haven't been seen on film, one or the other. Mostly skipped over. We'll be looking at species in the park era today as opposed to the world era. So first up, we're going to get through the original Jurassic Park species from the brochure and the DNA vials that you never see in the films. We'll start with Herrerasaurus here. Now, these guys that aren't in the films, I had to take a lot of creative liberties with to come up with effects because, well, they don't have a presence. Herrerasaurus, however, is in Jurassic Park the game, which I drew a bit of inspiration from. I originally wanted to use a Jurassic Park the game screenshot for the image, but they're pretty low quality. I mean, it's not exactly a graphically vibrant game, and without playing through it myself to get an image, there's also a surprisingly few decent images out there on the internet for that game. So because of that, I decided to go with a Jurassic World Evolution image here from the first game, even though the second's out now. The first game skins feel a little more like singularly distinctive, let's say. Like in Jurassic World Evolution 1, you've got a very particular default skin for a dinosaur that's very unique to that dinosaur, whereas the color palettes are shared and for the other skins. So the base skins in the first game make a lot more sense. In the second game, you've got these different patterns and base colors that you can swap around and mix and match. So the default combination isn't special because you have other combinations using the same color and the same stripes. So that's why I went for the first game for the screenshot for some of these dinosaurs. Also, I created these cards before the second game was out, well before. These dinosaur cards have been around for quite a while, these species cards. I don't see any reason to change the screenshots either, especially because I think the first game skins are more distinctive, like I said. I'm just repeating myself now. A little bit about Herrerasaurus here. So even though I'm not using a picture from Jurassic Park the game, I did base its effect vaguely off of Jurassic Park the game. In that the Herrerasaurus sequence is on the Bone Shaker roller coaster. I believe that's what it's called, Bone Shaker. Bone something, if I'm wrong. So I kind of went with a paddock upgrade attraction kind of interaction effect here. In this case, the Herrerasaurus keeps upgrades in the same and adjacent paddocks from being damaged in any way by rival park owners, rival card effects, which doesn't exactly track with what it does in Jurassic Park the game, mind you, but it still keeps that, that theming towards your paddock upgrades, your attractions, etc. Not too much else to say about Herrerasaurus. It's a very unique effect. There's not really any other species in the game that interacts with your paddock upgrades in this way. In terms of its stats, it's a pretty typical small carnivore. Ferocity rating, security is pretty typical. Ferocity is a little on the higher side. The income and fame are pretty typical. Herrerasaurus is on the cheaper side of rarity cost. And since Herrerasaurus is a member of the Herrerasauridae, obviously, it's not given a theropod subtype, so it's just a theropod, just basically effectively a basal theropod in the context of the card game. So yeah, next up we'll go ahead to Kanthosaurus. So now we're getting into a bit of a larger carnivore. We're getting into kind of the class of 3 fame species that are on the upper end, where they produce 2 income instead of 1, but there's still only 3 fame. There's kind of, broadly speaking, a few different classes of like dinosaur stats you get like that. And then it gets a higher ferocity rating to kind of offset that income, which is a little bit of how this works here. And then rarity is higher too for that reason. The Kanthosaurus is given the Carnosaur subtype alongside, Allosaurus and Monolothosaurus eventually, if I do Camp Cretaceous, which I intend to, but may not, happen depending on how that all knocks out. So yeah, that's Metri's subtype. The effect here for Kanthosaurus, this is kind of an effect that I came up with separately from a dinosaur, then looked for a dinosaur to put it onto, and it felt right on the Metri. It's kind of an effect that's a little bit analogous to the Brachiosaurus starter, where the Brachiosaurus gives you this conditional income boost that's kind of predicated upon having a small park, right? Brachiosaurus, if it's alone, you get the income boost, you make a bunch of money real quick. Kanthosaurus kind of plays into that strategy where if you want to improve your Brachiosaurus park and start adding some more species, well, adding a Metri is nice because you'll probably be behind in terms of fame total, and then you'll get this +3 income bonus here from the Metri effect. And since that effect is so similar to the Brachii effect, that's a big reason I was looking for kind of a Jurassic Park 1 species to put that effect onto. And the Metri felt right as kind of this mid-sized carnivore that would kind of match up with the Brachii, in a way. As well, because in the context of the species list for the original Jurassic Park, you've got, the big headliner, the Tyrannosaurus, right? And the Metriacanthosaurus in that context is kind of like a smaller, crappier T-Rex. It's not. It's got a lot more distinctive stuff going on with it, but it kind of fills that role, right? So it's playing second fiddle to the T-Rex, kind of in the park roster, and then that effect here kind of does the same thing. If the other person is sitting on a park that's like Brachiosaurus and Tyrannosaurus, and your park's Brachiosaurus and Metriacanthosaurus, you're playing second fiddle, you get the income bonus triggering because your fame total is lower because the Metri's got lower fame than the Rex. Right, that's kind of the concept there. Again, JWE won a screenshot for this. But in the case of the Metriacanthosaurus, I wanted definitely a skin that captured the website Metri to get the most close to canon look we can get at what the Metriacanthosaurus in the franchise looks like. This species was in the original park and in World, so that's why we're going with the closest we can get to an actual depiction of it. Since we never saw the park version, we can't say it looked different than the world version. And really, we can't even say that this is what the world version looked like at the end of the day. That's the website for Jurassic World, that's a whole other discussion on how canonical that is. Species list, definitely canonical. Depictions, not so much, probably. Moving on. Species number 3 from the original park, Proceratosaurus. This one, you actually see the name in the film. That's true of the Metriacanthosaurus as well. Herrerasaurus is only seen on the brochure, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure even with like the open map version of Jurassic Park and like behind the scenes photos, you never see a Herrerasaurus DNA vial. It may have been on the prop, it just may have never been in the frame, is all. But yeah, Proceratosaurus here. This is another case of a card effect that I kind of came up with on my own, separate from species concepts, and then looked for a place to put it. Proceratosaurus, we have nothing to go off of for this dino. It's got all it is in terms of the franchise, even in terms of like a lot of extended lore, like Jurassic Park the game, is a DNA vial. That's it. An embryo vial, that is, in the cold storage room when Nedry's still in the embryos. So that's why this one, especially, and the one coming up after this, Segisaurus, were just completely open to me to do whatever I wanted. So conceptually, Proceratosaurus and Segisaurus are very small carnivores, so they kind of fit into that Compsognathus, Procompsognathus niche of like a swarmy little carnivore, which is exactly how they end up playing out in the Jurassic World Evolution games, which gives you kind of the best, like that's the most like presence we have for Proceratosaurus, and not Segisaurus because it's not in there, but we do have Coelophysis, which is closely related to Segisaurus in JWE2, and both of those are like very high population dinosaurs. So what I did then is I had a couple of interesting ideas for like triggers based off additional population or cloning effects and whatnot. So Proceratosaurus being kind of, I think it's larger than Segisaurus, I'm fairly certain, but I could be wrong, but not by much. But I felt this effect, it just felt more like a Proceratosaurus effect. So you basically get to clone the Proceratosaurus for free, because you get your action refunded and you can take an additional action, which can include just breeding a second Proceratosaurus population and putting a counter immediately onto the Procerato when you clone it. So it kind of helps you build up high population, which matches the kind of swarming concept I was going for here. Again, JWE1 screenshot. Proceratosaurus is actually a Coelurosaur. It's either in the Tyrannosaur family tree or just outside of it. I don't remember for sure. But it's closely related to Tyrannosaurus, actually. Just really separated from it in time, being a Jurassic era species. The Proceratosaurus has been given a security rating of 4. It's a bit of an escape artist, but its ferocity is only 1 because it's pretty small. So it's an easy dinosaur for the opponent to, get it to break out. If they want to play a breakout event on it, trigger some sort of effect causing a breakout, it's very likely to succeed, but then it won't do much damage. It's easily contained when it escapes in your park. And yeah, other than that, 1 income, 3 fame, pretty typical. 5 rarity cost, pretty typical too. Basically, you're paying effectively like a $1 penalty on rarity for this additional clone effect, kind of as an offset for that. Other than that, the stats are pretty typical. Segisaurus, in some ways, the most obscure dinosaur in the franchise, other than maybe some of the Fallen Kingdom corpses. In terms of dinosaurs in the original, like, Jurassic Park era, other than maybe some of the Lost World corpses, I guess, too, are pretty obscure, which may be like a Pato and a Monto. It's still pretty obscure. Yeah, what was I talking about? So the picture for Segisaurus here is the closest we have to a franchise version of Segisaurus, because it comes from the JP Institute website. I've gone ahead and grabbed a background from the DPG webpage to comp it onto, because the Segi picture is just this little animated Segisaurus, the little drawn Segisaurus, just on a white background. Blends in a little too much, a little hard to see, but what are you gonna do? Segisaurus really doesn't show up in like anything. Again, coelophysid, pretty small. Being that it's a coelophysid, we're just counting it as like a basal theropod here, so it gets no additional subtype. It gets a pretty typical little stat spread of 2 ferocity, 2 security. Not as much of an escape artist as Proceratosaurus, but it's been given a little bit of a bump to ferocity. More just to set it apart from Procerato than anything else. And again, Segisaurus' effect here is just kind of an effect I came up with, then looked for a dinosaur to add it to. This is another kind of swarm effect, leaning into the fact that it's a very small carnivore here. So whenever you pay your 4 revenue during your cloning phase to add population to Segisaurus instead of cloning a new species or adding population to another dinosaur, you get the bonus of drawing a card, which encourages you to breed a very large population of Segisaurus, and that's how you get the whole swarm thing going, right? Potentially a pretty powerful effect to help you dig through your deck. It's pretty good if you're playing a strategy that's really centered on obstacles to disrupt opposing parks, because this is a way for you to power draw into more obstacles quicker. There's a limit to obviously how many obstacles you can play in a turn, it being 1, but there's ways to increase that limit, things that can play into that. And so Segisaurus can potentially be a very powerful draw engine for that sort of strategy. Conversely, it's a low-fame dinosaur, and if you're spending all your cloning phases just putting money into drawing cards and boosting population of Segisaurus, you're not going to get much of anywhere from that in terms of winning the game through traditional means. Maybe you can use it to power out a financial victory by getting just a lot of income from the large population, but you'll probably need some additional support for that, and there's probably better dinosaurs to do income-based strategies with than Segi. Definitely supports a more aggressive, disruptive strategy, I think. Next, we'll get into a couple, I believe our last 2 starting species. So, in the earlier versions of the game, the starting species were rather different. There was only 4 instead of 5 now. Stegosaurus has been converted over to a starting species from a regular species. I was never happy with Stegosaurus' effect anyway, so it was the perfect candidate to redo completely from scratch. And this effect is still... This hasn't been playtested. This is the new starting species added for this iteration. This is a completely new card effect. So this is totally subject to change depending on playtesting and feedback. So if that happens, don't be surprised. And yeah, so the original starting species were 2 sauropods and then Gallimimus and 2 hadrosaurs. And I decided, or no, it was 1 hadro, galley, and 2 sauropods because there were 4. And now it's 5. I remember my own game, surely. And now I decided it would be nice if we had the starting species had different subtypes, different clades. So Stegosaurus fills in the Thyreophoran starter gap. Thyreophora is the combined group of Stegosaurs and Ankylosaurs and Kylosaurs. I saw no reason to differentiate the two, given to the fact that both groups have very limited presence in the franchise. Stegosaurus, Peloroplites, and Kylosaurus, Kanthosaurus. Four. Just four. Which is just about enough to actually justify a subgroup altogether. There are some rare subgroups in the game, but yeah, having two separate groups of two apiece felt like it'd be a lot worse. And honestly, I'm not going to promise Peloroplites ever makes it into the card game, given that it's only seen as a corpse in Fallen Kingdom, and that's something that could easily be retconned to be a different species. So until Peloroplites shows up somewhere in the franchise, be it Jurassic World Evolution 2 or any other piece of like tie-in merch or games or something, I'm probably not gonna do a card for it. I actually have a card for it. I've actually made Teratophones and Peloroplites, but with restructuring the decks, they were easy things to cut, and so I'm kind of holding them off to the side and waiting for the right time to include them, and for like a little bit more canon support to be behind them. Basically, that's the idea. Stegosaurus is our Thyreophorans starter then. Its ability here is giving you an additional 4 cards, 1 per spike on the tail, to your starting hand effectively. Not quite to your starting hand, because you get to draw your starting hand, and then you can choose to mulligan, and then only after you've kept your hand do you get the bonus 4 cards. So it's not quite a 9-card opener because of the mulligan rules. It's a little worse than that. Stegosaurus has a few other unique traits here. Rarity 4, keep with the 4 theme. Stats are all 2s. 2 spikes on each side of the tail, I guess. It felt fun to have a 2-2-2-2, because there's never been one of those in any iteration of the game. Stegosaurus is actually the only species with 2 fame in the whole game. There was the change from like 2.0 to 3.0, and we're on like 3.5 right now, involved a little bit of more consolidation of fame totals. There used to basically be like an even representation of 1 through 5, and it felt really weird ever justifying more than like maybe 1 or 2 utility like species with 1 or 2 fame points. It always felt like the higher point ones are just strictly better no matter what in playtesting. So that resulted in basically everything getting consolidated into 3s or 4s and 5s becoming special. One headliner with 5 rarity per deck, or 5 fame rather per deck, and then the starters kept the 1 fame. So 2 just got completely left by the wayside. But I thought Stegosaurus was a nice opportunity to bring 2 back as a fame value. Differentiates it a little bit more from the other starters, which is fun. It's also 2 income, which puts it in an interesting starting spot between most of the rest of the field and Brachiosaurus, which is 1 income but 3 early on in the game when you're starting out. So Stegosaurus is kind of filling in a lot of middle ground. It does a lot of different things, which, depending on how playtesting goes, I might actually backtrack on. I might feel like it does too many things in playtesting. The reason Stegosaurus is coming in here and it hasn't been in the Lost World previews, the Site B previews, or the Jurassic World previews is because it's been unplaytested. But I just haven't had a chance to playtest. I've been really busy, so development of the game has stalled out a bit. So I figured I'd just throw it out there, get it in the previews, and the game is going to be released in effectively a beta state to the wider audience, which means every card is subject to change depending on wider playtesting and more feedback that comes in and balance with other new cards. So I think it's perfectly fine to preview this effect, get it out there. So our last one here. Now you might be looking at Edmontosaurus and think, hey, that's a Jurassic World species. Well, arguably there's an Edmontosaurus skull in Lost World, so you could argue that Edmontosaurus is on InGen's list and is present on Site B. I think even the DPG actually supports there being Edmontosauruses on Sorna. I'm pretty sure there's like 4 Edmontosauruses or something in the DPG lists, which I'm not going to rant about the DPG too much, but I don't exactly consider it canon. I consider it like a good like B-level canon. Like if you want to make a decision on something, and there's nothing in the film to directly support it, or if you're looking for more evidence to support something in the film, you can like see what the DPG thinks and be like, yeah, okay, at least the DPG supports this decision or whatever, or leans this way. But I think the DPG is self-contradictory, and there's a few aspects of it that I think are a bit illogical. Anyway, that's not the point of this video. Edmontosaurus is our last starting species. This is our hadrosaur. And this effect, just a little peek behind the curtain, used to be Kanthosaurus. But I kind of wanted to tighten up the theming on the decks, and so when I went and was redoing and redistributing the starting species to make sure that we had different subtypes for them, I also reevaluated what hadrosaur I wanted as a starter. And since Monosaurus has no presence in the films, and Kanthosaurus has barely any presence in the films, it was really easy to just shuffle those two abilities around. So the Kanthosaurus you've seen in the previous preview video for Slave B species, I believe it was in, that's the old Edmontosaurus effect. They literally just traded places. They traded their stat totals, everything just flip-flopped. Literally just change the picture, change the title of the card, same card. Edmontosaurus is an interesting one here. So this effect is quite powerful, but also really skill testing. It's the most skill testing of the starters. And the reason for that is you're basically able to just trade off your income generation from Monosaurus for a turn for a card instead. And you make that choice. It's not forced into the card draw. Which means you need to evaluate if you need the money from this or you need the card more every turn. It's really good for aggressive strategies, like I mentioned with the Segisaurus. It pairs really well there. Empowering a lot of card draw to play a lot of obstacles, disrupt the other player. And it's also just good versatility. It can help you get into more species to expand your park, more upgrades, whatever you're kind of looking for. But you've got to just kind of balance that income total. It kind of leans well into a non-breeding strategy, which sets it apart from like Gallimimus, which is pro-breeding, and a bunch of other dinosaurs that are perfectly happy to. Well, Brachiosaurus is also pro-breeding because generally when you play a Brachiosaurus build, you want only Brachies in your park for a while, so you breed 3, 4, 5 additional Brachiosaurus until you introduce a new species, and then you have a ton of money already coming in. You don't really miss the +2 from the Brachie text. So Edmontosaurus fills the opposite niche of like low levels of breeding new population for your dinosaur species. Ultimately, usually when you're playing an Edmontosaurus build, you'll breed one additional population on it as a protection for it getting injured somehow. Because if there's an injury, the population token basically soaks that and you lose the population instead. Making sure that the species doesn't go extinct on you by keeping that extra population around. But since you're going to convert your income into a card draw, and it doesn't matter how much income you're making, you don't want to put a ton of population on it because you're going to lose out on all that money. Generally, you go Edmontosaurus, turn 1, you breed an additional Edmontosaurus population onto it. So you got 2 Edmontosaurs in your park. And then, you're still taking the money at that point. Turn 3, you take a couple bucks. You're going to try and drop another species as soon as possible, and then breed population on that while you kind of just turn your Edmontosaurus into a draw engine in the mid-late game. It sits there with like 1 population token and just draws you that card every turn. So very, very strong if you get to the late game, but it really stalls out your early game development, so you got to be real smart about it. It's probably my favorite starter. I really do I feel really good about Galli, Brachii. They're very thematic effects. Gallimimus is really fun to build around. And Brachiosaurus enables some alternate victories with large amounts of revenue. But as far as like just a raw ability in the game, ignoring what dinosaur it's attached to, ignoring the flavor of it, this is an effect I really like. And there's a lot of different. It's a nice effect too because there's a lot of different ways you can build around it. It doesn't just force you into like one strict path. Like Gallimimus basically is you can do financial stuff, you can do breeding stuff, and those are your 2 paths, and that's it. Sometimes you can just use a financial engine to just kickstart your actual strategy. That's always valid. but it's still a bit more narrow and restrictive. There's not too many avenues of what you can actually do with Gallimimus itself. It can support an additional strategy, but the strategies that are centered on like Gallimimus or Brachiosaurus are pretty limited and fairly linear. Not true for Monosaurus. It's wide open field. And I like having different, starting species that go in those different directions. Sometimes it's nice to have a dinosaur that very much you can tell what the strategy is and how to play with it. It's nice to have like those different skill caps for players at different levels to like try out different stuff. So that it will be it for this preview video. A little bit of a longer one, but a little bit more like design insight stuff, because now we're kind of getting into some more involved species, some more involved effects on some of these species, and species that we don't see in the film. So they're not like, there's not a clear path to like what they should be doing in terms of like their card flavor. So you just kind of get to go wild and come up with some interesting effects and have fun with them. So yeah, that'll be it for this video then. Until next time.